Hello, everyone. Welcome to When I'm High, a podcast that is all about what it's like to be high. A good chunk of this part 2 of Sam's episode isn't actually about what it's like to be high. We get into a pretty interesting conversation about lots of thoughts about cannabis and its legality and things like that. It was a very unexpected conversation that I think made us both think about a lot of things. So enjoy that part. That's going to be right after you hear me talking. But then we do get back into more about what it's like to be high. On with part 2. So given that, do you feel like your views on cannabis have changed over the years?
Yeah, they have. And we have to start way back in junior high school, where there was a lot of it going on. And as a square peg who, really didn't fit in, dealt with a lot of harassment and bullying from a lot of kids, older kids, bigger kids, kids who were, getting the quarter barrel and the keg and smoking weed. And I came to associate it with assholery. I didn't really know a lot of nice burnouts, and that's what we called them then.
Yeah.
Even though I know there were some, they really weren't. I wasn't in a group. So I wasn't in either of those two groups who were user groups, And so for me, it became kind of a point of pride of, I don't want to fit in with those, popular asshole kids and jocks, and what they're doing is stupid. And I continued, obviously, for a long time. I was around 40, as I said, when I finally took a bong hit from the singer in my band, and she was like, "You never did this?" No, I had no reason to.
Did you feel like that a lot of that assholery came from the cannabis because that it was so prevalent with them?
I'm not going to say it came from it, but I'm going to say this. There is an element to drug use, or can be for some, of hedonism. And when I say hedonism, I don't mean, that I'm against free love or against carnality. It's more taking something artificial, or in this case natural, but impactful, and putting it inside me, altering my brain, for the fun of it. And for a long time, I felt, and I guess I largely still do, that self-reliance is a good thing. And I would make exceptions for medications, and so certainly I never had any problem with marijuana for glaucoma or any of the other medical conditions, chronic pain, and hospice use and so forth. But I did see these kids and then young adults who, there was a correlation. I'm not going to say it was cause and effect. There was a correlation between the hedonism of, fuck you suck, the bullying, and let's go get wasted, let's go get high. And these were the same, they'd get high and it wouldn't make them mellow. To my experience, it didn't make them nice to me or to other people who were on the outside. And today, as a progressive, I look at all the issues that are on the progressive agenda, and I see pot legalization there, and I think, that's qualitatively different. I'm sorry, it just is. It's not the same as fighting racism or sexism or homophobia. It's not the same. It's you want this thing that makes you happy, and you want it to be legal, and somehow that's getting mixed in with just basic justice and marriage equality issues. And
right. I will actually respectfully disagree.
Okay.
Only because, just because it's the first thing that popped in my head, and I think that there are other, but I think the big one, the really big one, is how black and brown people are so disproportionately arrested for cannabis use. That I think is one of the really, really big reasons. And I know Illinois was really the biggest reason why they pushed for legalization was because they wanted to fix that as much as they can, right? I think a lot of people got let out of jail, and so that alone, I totally see what you're saying.
Yeah, but see what you're describing there is a legal phenomenon, unequal enforcement based on race. What you're ducking there is the possible solution of either A, enforce it just as harshly against whites and white communities. And I'm not, saying that that's the way to go. It clearly isn't. I'm glad they did what they did. That is a great reason but it just anything where justice is meted out unfairly, right? Like the death penalty, for instance.
Yeah.
If you oppose the death penalty, you look at it and say, well, how come X percent of these capital crimes are committed by whites versus blacks, and yet of the blacks, the majority are going there, and of the whites, the minority are not being sent to death row. So, again, this notion of make it easier for me to get that which I enjoy, and that's not the same as make it possible for me to marry a same-sex partner, or make it possible for me to vote or to not get lynched. They're just different. They're qualitatively different to me.
If you go back to the history of why it became illegal in the first place, is very much based in race, like almost 100%, because they made it illegal because a lot of black jazz players were getting high and taking their white women. These are things that they were saying, and it made them crazy and whatever. And so the fact that it became illegal in the first place was because of race, basically. So it really ends up being an equality issue.
Sure.
Obviously, we're not going to...
No, we're not going to convince each other, and I don't mean to. I will say I am absolutely sure you're right that there is a significant overlap with issues of race. I'm also going to say that there are significant overlaps on race with a lot of other issues, and on gender with a lot of issues, and on orientation with a lot of issues.
Yeah, and I was going to just tag on to that said, but I still completely understand what you're saying, how just in the surface, it does seem like cannabis legalization is so vastly different than gender rights and race rights and women's rights and all those things.
I feel that it is. I still feel that it is.
And I get that. I totally get that.
The progressive agenda, I'd like, okay, this isn't to me quite the progressive agenda. It may be something where I support you on the basis of self-determination, which kind of is. But self-determination for what? To be able to marry the person you want? No. Self-determination for the ability to recreate in this specific way.
At that level, it's absolutely, they're not equatable at all. Right. It's almost like saying if alcohol were illegal, it would be saying like, let's get alcohol legalized.
Yeah.
Right.
So can I just go off with the alcohol thing for a second?
Please.
Because on the surface, I know it is patently unfair that alcohol is so legal and so easy to come by, and has been ever since the end of Prohibition, and is, frankly, more dangerous than pot.
Scientifically proven.
Right? It's addictive as opposed to possibly dependency fostering, which is not the same kind of neurochemical phenomenon. And so, if I were Solomon and someone said, here are these two drugs, I would say, well, it's untenable to have the more dangerous one legal and the other one not. I might say, find a way to discourage use of both. I might say, make pot legal in the way that alcohol is, and so forth. But a very good friend of mine who founded a mental health consortium, and he has bipolar disorder and alcoholism and addiction. He is several years sober, and you know who I'm talking about, I think.
Probably. I can't think of who it is off the top of my head, but we can talk offline.
Yeah. Pretty famous guy. And I was at an event where he was asked about this, isn't this unfair? And he says, yes, it is. But practically speaking, given that we are in a culture and a society where already alcohol is way out of control, do we really need to be making it easier and legal for folks to bring yet another potentially harmful drug into the mix. And he's talking about things like driving while. And also the notion, which, we can talk about. I don't have a firm belief in gateway. But the notion that potentially using something and enjoying it, I think I can certainly see how that would lead to an invitation to try something that actually was destructive. Say, well, I enjoyed my time with pot. Not gateway in the sense of now that I've tried pot, I feel compelled, but more just it might make it easier to say yes to it.
Right.
And he is particularly critical of, well, frankly, things like this. We talked about these toasted s'mores. The individual packets inside don't say anything about what's in it. You kind of have to hunt a little on the outside package to find it in small print. And Joe Cameling, once something's legal, you will see, as you did with cigarettes, as you've seen with booze, things like cartoon characters. It already exists with pot. You know that.
Sure.
Little animals on containers and such.
I do think that at least some states have very specific rules on that sort of thing, make it not look like it's something a kid's candy. So it is a little surprising to see that those individually wrapped things don't specifically say that. But in terms, there's so many things that we can talk about.
That brought up a hornet's nest. The last thing I'll say about it before I turn it back to you. See, I need to do some intentional listening of the interviewer, clearly, but. Just as I don't want booze glamorized to kids, I don't want pot or anything else like that glamorized to kids, because deep down, I really kind of do believe in self-reliance. And again, I'm not talking about medications. I'm someone who benefits from medications. I'm talking about recreational use of mind-altering substances. Should not be glamorized or romanticized, in my opinion, because I would like those kids whose brains are still forming, into their early 20s, to grow up and become their best selves and then make sound, independent judgments about things like recreational drug use and alcohol.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think that I've heard that your brain is still forming until you're like 25.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so I am a big proponent of waiting until at least then. I'm not saying that states should make it illegal until you're 25. If you're going to do that for pot, you should do that for alcohol as well.
Right. How about illegal till 18?
I think, that's a funny one, because there's the argument of, well, we can go to war, we can get drafted for war at 18, but we can't drink or have pot until we're 21.
Till 18. I'm talking about 17-year-olds and younger who don't get drafted, who don't vote.
Right.
Okay. They're still children legally in every sense. So I would say it should not be illegal for them, and that honestly, parents who are, you have to think about that. Our parents who are disseminating, distributing mind-altering substances recreationally, mind-altering. I'm not talking about, ADHD stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Are they endangering their children? I mean, I would say that children in a house where folks are smoking cigarettes are endangering their children. I would call DCFS because,
for sure,
that's secondhand smoke, and those kids are inhaling it day after day, year after year. That's
and
wrong.
They have no control over that.
Right.
The
or
kids
now
don't.
During COVID, if the parents are being irresponsible about COVID, they're endangering their children, not to mention everyone else out there. Parents don't wear a mask, kid doesn't wear a mask. Well, they're gonna, the chance actually of them infecting others is greater than the chance of them getting infected, and it's all wrong. It's all irresponsible. Don't get me started on Christian Science.
I won't.
If some kid needs an operation, I'm sorry, I'm going to see that the government gets that kid an operation so that she can live. And if the parents have a problem with it, well, let's go to court and see if you should even have this kid in your home.
Well, this podcast just turned into a parenting podcast, so we're just going to change the name right now.
Right.
When I'm a parent.
I want my nanny state. I do.
There's a lot more that definitely could be talked about. The only thing that I can remember off the top of my head is in terms of the gateway situation, I don't have any scientific data. I wish I had more of that in my brain, but just anecdotally, just from talking to people, nobody's ever said, or they've actually actively said, I was never after smoking weed for a while, it was not a gateway thing for me. I didn't want to go try, heroin or other crack or whatever that was. Those are just anecdotes. I do know that they've done some studies, and I couldn't tell you the data on that, or the data, as some people like to say. But that's definitely something that I think in general that's essentially been disproven with cannabis. It might even actually have gone the other way, that alcohol is almost more of a gateway drug than cannabis is. Because your inhibitions are much lower.
My guess is it's a gray area. My guess it's very hard to quantify and prove one way or the other. And I'm certainly not saying during the Reagan era, the whole Just Say No movement would say that absolutely this is the first step, on a journey down to heroin. No. I'm saying that just common sense tells me that if you've tried it, you're using it, you enjoy it, probably you're more inclined to say yes to trying something else.
Right. Just the fact that you're interested in trying something that's going to alter you in some way, whether it's cannabis or alcohol or whatever, there's a higher chance that you're going to be more willing to say yes to other things.
You've had
a
positive experience, and so they would say then the pot is a stalking horse for something worse. And I would say it may turn out to be in some cases, but it's not intended as that, and it's not deployed as that.
Yeah. And just in general, I think on the legalization side, I think the biggest issue just has been that the propaganda around it has just been so irresponsible, so backwards, so incorrect over the last 100 years that was the big reason to this isn't the thing that you're saying it is. And there's no reason that it should be illegal, especially considering the fact that alcohol is. These are words I've said before.
Sure.
But we haven't had that conversation.
Well, and just getting back to my friend, his attitude is, in theory, you're right, that it's not fair. And it is, very preferential to alcohol. But in practice, here's the situation on the ground. We're trying to help people with major mental illness, which is so often, overlapping and blank with substance abuse of various kinds. And what we're trying to do is get people the substances they need from the pharmacist and not have them relying on something that, is maybe deflecting the greater issue.
Yeah, and that is obviously a huge topic, and I completely understand that sentiment of why are we bringing another thing into this world that's an option for people to get dependent on or have a problem with, and this is actually another argument for legalization, because until it is federally legalized, it's very, very difficult to actually do scientific studies on it. And until we can actually do the right amount of scientific studies that we should be able to do, like other countries can, we're not going to know the answers to those questions.
Yeah. I have 3 questions for you. Is that okay? Not to turn the tables.
I guess.
They just sort of emerge, and since I'm not high, I'll probably remember all 3. First, I just want to say, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. Which is what we say when we don't want to say I agree with what you're saying. The friend I mentioned, okay, so he is speaking from a place of some authority as not just a mental health expert, but as a recovering alcoholic who also smoked pot and took pills and has a major mental illness that is in check with medication. So, just he has credence.
Sure.
From that point of view.
And just on that,
doing heroic work to make the world a better place.
And just on that point, real quick, I want to say that I'm not saying or arguing that cannabis is a thing to fix all those things. There are definitely things that medication is 100% the thing that needs to be used over anything else. Yeah. I completely agree with that. Yeah.
I think that it may have some use in mood disorder treatment. And I agree with you that legalization is a good step toward studying that. I wanted to ask you about studies that I've seen over the years that did seem to be legit. One dealt with male, what was it? It was something having to do with male sexuality. I think it may have been sperm count.
Okay.
Male reproduction, not sexuality. and it seemed to suggest a suppressive effect from marijuana. Another one suggested a suppression of immune function for all genders. And the third question is, I agree with you about the anti-pot propaganda, low these many decades. Do you feel that there's also been pro-pot propaganda during that time that has been inaccurate or harmful?
So let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
In terms of the sperm count and the immune response, I can't speak to that scientifically.
Have you heard it? Heard of it?
I'm not sure, actually.
Okay.
I have heard...
Well, there's your homework, Spence.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. And I will be the first to admit that I am not an expert on the data, and I need to learn more. Yeah.
I just heard I'd seen data from that, probably in Time magazine, which I know is an establishment organ, but they were also JAMA or the Lancet in England. They were legit studies, it seemed.
And so what I will say is that I think I've heard both. I've heard things on both sides, and that's part of the problem.
Yeah.
Is that we're getting scientific information that argue both sides.
Yeah.
And then you sort of have to look at, well, what were the details of the study and who paid for the study? Because that's a huge thing about,
Sure.
So, but these are things that I will try and remember to look into. But I have heard a lot of studies that do specifically go back against the immune response, like helping to counteract cancer or to help it stop it from occurring in the first place. There are studies that talk about these things. But like you say, there are studies that say the opposite. So there's really no solid answer at this point.
It makes sense that anything that's going to engender calmness and relaxation could have a very positive effect in combating cancer, heart disease, blood pressure.
I mean,
issues.
just stress itself
and depression
will have a physiological effect on the heart and the immune system, creating cancer cells or whatever it is on your immune system in general.
That's right.
So, I mean, just that in and of itself will, I think, help a lot. And, and the fact that you look at the majority of the states in the country have approved it medically, I think says something there. There's still obviously a lot of studies to be done in the future. PTSD was something that popped in my head a little bit ago.
Right.
There's a lot of studies that show that, and also psilocybin mushrooms have a huge effect on the on counteracting PTSD.
I'm going to say, as someone who voluntarily works in and around mental health, that anything with the potential to be hallucinogenic probably should not be used with PTS.
Well,
and by the way, just very quickly, we call it PTS in this community because a general, retired, has come forth and said, drop the S. It's hard enough for me to get these guys and gals from this macho culture to acknowledge that they have a syndrome. If we say you've done 3 tours, you're dealing with a lot of stress, you've actually been traumatized, that's hard enough to get them to get help.
Sure.
But when you hang that S on it, or the D at the end, disorder.
Right.
That makes it much harder to convince them to get help. And so we call it PTS.
Yeah, and I do think I've heard that before, so thank you for reminding me as well.
But
and
anything hallucinogenic, potentially hallucinogenic, and that's not pot, I know.
No.
But I've had are not hallucinations.
Right, but specifically with mushrooms, what they do is that it's a very low dose. It's micro dosing, so they don't get to that level.
Yeah.
Just a little bit is enough to help the brain help itself in dealing with those things.
Yeah.
I thought that I had something else to say. Yeah, there's no hard evidence to really any of it. You had mentioned what was the third thing? The negative propaganda, or positive propaganda.
Pro-pot propaganda, and I mean, I acknowledge that the anti has, like Reefer Madness, for instance, has been just over the top and unfair and harmful. And I'm wondering if you feel that there's also been propaganda from the other side that has been over the top and negative and potentially harmful.
Nothing that I am specifically aware of. But I will say I'm sure that there is. I'm sure that people maybe go a little bit too far in in their message.
As people generally do.
Sure.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that that it pales in comparison to the negative propaganda.
Yeah.
I think that what the majority of the propaganda, pro-pot propaganda, I don't know. I think the majority of what that is really just trying to get the real information out there, which is actually what this podcast is all about.
And that's not propaganda. If you're getting real information out, that's not propaganda.
Right.
If you can find examples of, anything from the community that is encouraging of people below the age of consent, that this is great and this is fun and this has absolutely no potentially harmful impact or side effects on you, your life, your grades, your schooling, getting caught, your police record, et cetera, that to me would be propaganda.
Yeah, and I disagree with that, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I would be the first to say, if I had a kid, this was sort of a, we'll let this be sort of the end of this portion
Parenting
of the
section.
Yeah, if I were a parent, I would say, try it, but wait until you're at least 25.
Try it if you want to.
If you want to,
Right.
exactly. Although, I think that this is sort of what I've learned as I've gotten a little bit older in my years. I think that there is a vast world out there, and I think that you sort of, I don't want to say you owe it to yourself, but I think that you'll learn more about who you are as a person if you experiment with things. And obviously, if you don't want to, don't do it. I completely agree with that statement.
Yeah.
But I feel like
There is a lot of peer pressure. That's real.
Oh,
I can tell you.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And that's a bad thing.
It is a bad thing, and I think there are countless people who try things for the first time because of peer pressure.
Right.
And I'm grateful that I did not do that. But yes, 100% agree that people should not. They need to do it on their own terms.
That's right. And I wouldn't want a teen or preteen to smoke pot because it seemed expected of her any more than I would want her to feel like she had to perform a blowjob on Ricky.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's got to be on your own terms when you're ready. And I think that there is something to say about experimenting with different things. I mean, that's the same for a little bit of pot, a little bit of alcohol, and different foods. Personally, I don't like mushrooms, but I force myself. I've got a little country accent in there.
Yeah, well.
I force myself to have them every once in a while because I know they're good for me.
Yeah.
And I know that they're healthy.
So, Spence, I don't like them cooked, but I love them raw on salad. Do you like them raw at all?
Not really. I don't like them at all.
It's about the texture of them when they're cooked, combined
That's
with the
worse.
flavor.
Yeah, it's
and
the flavor.
eggplant too. The cooked eggplant, there's something about and it's similar to mushroom. Something about that slightly slimy.
Yeah.
And yet I love raw oysters, so who knows? But I do like the white, what are they, shiitake, whatever they are, the mushrooms raw on a salad. I like that a lot. So she only likes them cooked.
Yeah.
And as the cook for the household, I cook some, put them on her salad.
Yeah.
I leave the rest raw, put them on mine.
For me, it's both. It's the taste and the texture,
Okay.
but it's sort of the same thing. It's see what the foods are out there. Travel if you can. See what else is out there. Talk to people who you wouldn't necessarily want to talk to. And I think that you learn a lot about yourself. I feel like I had more to say about this, but I can't even remember at this point. But it's
get away from those s'mores, Spence. Come on.
Right. But I do just want to clarify that I do think that people need to wait until they're older, like we said. That goes with alcohol too.
Yes, it does.
I think that in Europe, France especially, they let their kids have a little bit of wine,
Right.
and I think that they created a culture around alcohol that is not abusive like
Right.
it is here in America, and that I respect. If it's
That's
a little bit
right.
here and there,
That's right.
with your parents around, I think that's fine.
And this was my experience growing up.
Okay,
but I see again a qualitative difference here. This time it favors alcohol. And that is that, sure, they would pour me half a glass of wine at Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner. Correct me if I'm wrong. there is no particular joy other than the taste of a gummy or a s'more in the immediate experience of taking pot into yourself. I mean, I suppose the warm smoke might feel good or something. What I'm saying is that when I was a kid, I never had nearly enough to get a buzz. It was to be part of this kind of formal or holiday or whatever experience. And what do you think of the taste? I like this one. I didn't like that one, you know? So, now that I say it, I'm hearing that there is the potential for an immediate enjoyment level of something that pot in a form that tastes good or smoke that feels good. So maybe they're not that different in that regard.
No, but what is different, I think, is how cannabis greatly affects your brain, I think, more so, and I'm going to feel terrible if I'm wrong about this, but my gut is that it affects your brain more so than alcohol does, especially in those younger years.
Right, so that a kid could have a third, a half of a glass of wine when he's 14.
Yeah.
And be big enough that that's not going to do shit, except maybe taste good.
Right.
Whereas a comparable dose, if you will, of pot is going to have an altering effect.
Yeah, I do agree with that for sure. So we definitely went into directions that I was not expecting, but I liked it because I like having these conversations and learning more about each other and thinking about things that we wouldn't have thought about. So that was really awesome. I actually do still have a couple of questions for you if you're okay with that.
Let's do it.
In general, and you can interpret this however you want, how much would you say is pot in your life or a part of your life?
Marginal.
Yeah.
Simply because, what did I say? Maybe 8 times in the past 6 months.
Yeah.
You know? And again, we agree. My wife and I agree. That was interesting. Glad we did it. Probably do it again from time to time. Can't say, oh, this was so wonderful. We want to do it a lot. But neither was it bad. And it was interesting. I think, for smart people, it's interesting to encounter new things. But this takes, really for anyone, but this takes me back to what you were saying about new experiences. New experiences are good. They are. And you're using the comparison to food. But the thing is, those mushrooms, unless they're psychoactive, eating them or not eating them is not going to really, change your brain functioning.
Right.
And likewise, if I decided, well, I've dabbled or more in most art forms, but I've never tried glass blowing, that would be an interesting experience. And so I go and do a class in it. It's not the same.
No, it's not the same, although not to the same level at least. But there is something I think that's going on in your brain. When you learn a new skill or whatever it is, you're creating these new pathways in your brain that marijuana is also doing, but on a much different and larger level.
A more direct level.
Yes, a more direct level. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Let's see. Some of these questions don't necessarily apply to you. Oh, you given your experience, you haven't experienced a lot of the things a lot of other people have in terms of the music and creativity or the food or things like that. So I definitely do. I thought I had something more profound to say about that.
Dog walking I've experienced.
Oh yeah, tell me about that. I actually wrote that down. I wanted to know more about that.
I knew you'd come back to that, and I'm glad to have led you there because we have this beloved dog, and we've had him almost 10 years, and so I've done a lot of walking of him. And did take him out by myself one time after she had fallen asleep, after my wife had fallen asleep. And, last walk of the night. You got to do it. And there we were walking north on a very familiar stretch of sidewalk. And I'm feeling different and things are looking a little different. And the headspace is just different arrangement of the furniture. And he looks back at me, as he sometimes does, only this time with a human expression on his face. Not a human face.
Right.
Not the dog man from 1977 Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Not that. But just an expression with more intellect and savvy than I'm accustomed to from a very sweet but not very bright dog.
Right.
And
Objectively speaking.
and it wasn't so extreme that it like made me scream or jump or anything, but it's like, oh, that's different, isn't it? Hi, Paul, says I to my dog. Hi. What's going on, man?
This was all during the walk.
Yeah.
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 So
And thank God he did not reply.
Yeah, that would have been a whole other situation. So what do you think was going on there?
I could be generous and say that I was seeing a side of him that I usually don't. But I just think it was, not a hallucination, but a skewed or altered perception.
Do you think that he was actually doing something a little bit different with his face, or do you think that you were just seeing his face in a different way?
I think the latter. I'd say the former if I believed that he had any sense that I was acting differently.
Right.
And that's possible.
Sure.
He may have been picking up on something. Maybe without even knowing it, I was talking to him weirdly or singing weirdly or the root was a little bit jagged or something that I'm not aware of, and maybe he turned back to look at me because something was out of the ordinary. That certainly could be. But if so, it's not anything I noticed. It just seemed to be this, the dog initiating a human expression over the shoulder at me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that we, especially, when under the influence of something, we definitely do things differently that we're very much not aware of.
Yeah.
And dogs are so much in their routine of the route that you take on the walk,
That's it.
The speed.
They rely on that consistency. Yeah. I may have been skipping, which would have done the trick. Sure.
Chances are, I'm going to guess no. But yes. Or even just the tightness of the leash. All those little things, they're so attuned to that stuff. There definitely could have been something different that was going on.
Could be. We'll never know.
Yeah. You also mentioned just looking around in like a room that you're used to. Any specifics about that?
A slight difference. It didn't turn into German expressionism or something.
Right.
It's just like, maybe the ceiling looked like it was going just a little bit wider out or a tiny bit wider than the walls or something like that. And that's not a specific thing I noticed. It's just I'm trying to, because I don't remember what I noticed, but I remember the character of it. And I think it was sort of along those lines.
Yeah. It just feels a little bit different than what you're used to.
Slight distortion.
Yeah. What do you think your future with cannabis might be like?
Well, we have some left. We're certainly not going to let them go to waste. I see there's 1.5 glazed clementine orange gummies, and there's several of the not for Halloween trick-or-treat use toasted s'mores. I know we'll go through these and probably get some more at some point. But, sorry to disappoint anyone out there who... Or you, Spence, who were hoping that maybe that I would really take to it. I neither took to it nor took against it.
Sure.
But if there's a positive here, we could say, A, we have more of an understanding now of, this experience. And B, for me, maybe for her, I wouldn't speak for her. For me, there's probably... Not that there was a ton of judgment, but there was some. There's probably a little bit less judgment on my part toward people for whom this is important. I never have, been someone who judges you because, you're really in that petty department of people who may use but also get a lot done. And you're not, to my mind, a floor sitter. Whoa, I just had this idea. No, I would never put you in that category. And I do know people for whom it has seemed to me to be detrimental to their productivity.
And you're not the first to say that.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
It's my perception.
Yeah. There's definitely some truth to that. But, there's also truth to the other side. I know people from high school who would smoke regularly, but are also... very productive, very smart. You'd never know that that was a part of their life.
Do they smoke still, most of them?
Maybe a little bit here and there, but I don't
Okay.
think it's as much as it was. I think they sort of got that out of their system.
Yeah.
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 A question that came up to me was, do you think that it's changed your relationship at all, you and your wife? Do you think that there's been any...
I'd say a little bit in that it's one more thing we've shared.
Sure.
Which is all to the good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And maybe, too, the fact that we've come out of it with very similar kind of evaluatory responses.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, if one of us had come out saying, oh, let's do this all the time, and the other, I really didn't like it,
Right.
that would be bad.
Sure.
Yeah.
In terms of the note on Halloween and trick-or-treating,
Yeah.
I've seen, I don't know if it's memes or whatever it is, but people have said, there's no way people are going to give kids...
Something that expensive.
Well, yeah, basically, they're not going to give their marijuana to kids because that's a lot of money and they want to keep it for themselves.
Beyond that, too, vast majority of users, just like, the vast majority of functional adults, are not going to be that reckless.
Yeah.
With kids.
Yeah.
So
the other joke is the worst thing that's going to happen to you when you get high is you're going to put the TV remote in the fridge.
Right.
That's about as bad as
Right.
it gets.
Well, and another thing about edibles, I think, and if there are brownies, even if someone has made them, if there are these grams, if someone doesn't know what that is, they're likely to, pick up 2-3 brownies at a sitting.
Yeah.
Like this little individual s'more. Oh, how cool that s'mores are individual. You end up with taking 5, eating 5 or 6. So labeling is really important, and the education that goes with, edibles are different.
Yeah, and I do think that most people, like, for instance, if they were to make brownies and bring them to a party or something like that, I do think most people who were the one who brought it are aware enough to make it clear to everybody, these are different, these are special. Put a sign over it, put a Post-it on a covering or something like that.
Right.
But yes, there are a
One
lot
per
of stories.
customer, please.
Right.
But
Or a bite.
Spence, you're more than a little younger than I am. I don't know if you remember the sitcom from the 70s and 80s called Barney Miller. It was the 12th Precinct, Manhattan, and one of the great sitcoms. And the classic episode, everyone's favorite, is called Hash, and it's where Wojo, the Polish-American blue-collar detective, is dating a hippie, and he brings in these brownies she made. And then you get to see every one of your beloved squad detectives high. And it is hilarious.
Sure.
Go to YouTube. That's part of your homework.
Yeah.
Just look up Barney Miller Hash. The whole thing is up there.
Yeah, that sounds very entertaining because I'm very curious to know how they portrayed it. Is it accurate? Is it not accurate? Does it really matter? It's funny. Who cares?
Well, yeah, one of the detectives, Harris, he's no stranger to it. Very clearly, he's no stranger to
okay.
it. And Barney says, he's high but more functional, probably because he's used to it.
Yeah.
And Barney, the captain, he says, Harris, when they're figuring out what's happening, take this and have this tested. And he says, okay, and he puts it right in his mouth. Not like that.
I love it. Do you ever watch Bob's Burgers?
No, I should because I love King of the Hill, and I've
Okay.
heard that they're pretty similar.
Yeah, I haven't seen as much King of the Hill. I would almost venture to say Bob's Burgers is funnier, but they're also different.
It depends how you grew up. I grew up as
Yeah.
Bobby Hill, essentially.
Yeah, you might
with
appreciate...
a very, very straightforward, by the book
Yeah.
suburban dad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might appreciate King of the Hill more, but Bob's Burgers is great, and there's one episode where they have the same situation. I think they eat some special cookies that they didn't
Yeah.
know, and they get high, and it's hilarious.
I don't think anyone did it before Barney Miller because this was like 76-ish, which is pretty gutsy,
Yeah.
pretty ballsy.
At that time.
It was right before the sitcom Soap, which went intentionally broke all these taboos and barriers.
Okay.
And they got away with it.
Yeah. It would be actually, I should probably do some research. What was the first one to do this?
But this one got so much attention and still is so well remembered and loved. I would say it's a signal moment probably. In the depiction of pot in the media, in mass media, mass
Interesting.
culture. Yeah.
I will have to look into that.
Yeah.
And then just the last question is, what do you want to say to pot?
Say to it?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a great question. It's very creative. Do you usually end with that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice knowing you. Stop by from time to time. I don't think we'll be hiring you for this organization, but
Maybe on a freelancer every once in a while.
maybe the occasional freelance
Consultant.
weekend job.
Yeah.
Good to know you.
Sounds good. Good to know you.
And one other thing, Pod. You go out there and help the sick people whom you are so capable of helping, whether it's their eyes or chronic or fatal conditions or I don't know, migraines, probably severe arthritis, bursitis. I don't know what the list is, but I know there's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And very glad that you're able to legally and hopefully insured. That's a whole nother, make visits to them. And I think your time is probably better spent over there than with me.
Sounds good. Thank you very much. This was an incredibly informative and fun discussion that I hope the people appreciated it as much as I did. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. It was a fine conversation, even when I was talking.
Yeah.
And I really just don't know much about this stuff,
Right, and we both, I think, have a lot of education. I have some homework to do.
Mm-hmm.
I need to go look up some things. You've got some homework to do. Maybe in another month or 2 or 6 or 8 or whatever it is, I'll come back and we'll talk about some of these other things.
Yeah, we could do that.
And I think that just about those, I think you'll have a broader experience of how it affects you once you do those things that are, I think, so integral to who you are as a person.
Yeah. Music making, probably drawing, probably writing. Mm-hmm. Those are the ones that leap to mind.
Some movie watching, maybe.
Maybe watch The Shining. There it is. Yeah. You going to write these down for me and send me an assignment sheet?
Yes.
Okay.
I will do that.
All right, thanks.
I will make...
Now I can check them off.
An engraved invitation.
We'll see if I can make the check inside the box, where it will be.
Yeah,
I refuse to submit to the fascism of checking the box.
Think outside the box, man. Cool. Well, thank you to all of you very much for listening. As I usually say at the end of these, please rate and review and share and subscribe and all those fun things. Thank you to Sam for having this discussion with me. The dog was out here for a little while before, but he didn't want to stay, so he left.
He didn't give us any strange looks. And if I may say in closing, Dave's not here, man.
All right, with that, we are ending this episode. So until next time, this is Spencer talking about when people are high. Goodbye.